been tasked with being brief, so we will. This is how it's been throughout this project. It has been nursing and social work standing side by side up at the front. So I'm pleased to get the opportunity to come along and speak to you all today about our journey on the framework. And when we were appointed as joint chairs of this task and finish group, Colin and I were actually challenged quite a bit in terms of our ability to reflect current nursing practice, neither of us being nurses at current nursing practice. However, as Director of Regulation and Nursing in RQIA, I absolutely understood the changing context of care delivery. And I also understood the challenges and the difference between good and poor decision making and the impact that that can have on patient care. Colm Conway, as Chief Executive of NISC, likewise understood the complex situations that practitioners can find themselves in and the need for sound, rational decision making processes to guide practice. So we both understood and actually were very acutely aware of the workforce challenges and the multidisciplinary team change that's been happening across health and social care that we face now and will face in the future. And this required that we support our professions to be competent and confident to meet that future. So our Chief Nursing Officer got it right. We were ideally suited to lead on this work. Don't make that sound like it doesn't happen very often. Our Chief Nursing Officer definitely got it right. Colin, with his statesman-like skills of mediation and his ability to negotiate stormy waters, my drive and passion to get things done and the ability to deal with challenge and uncertainty, a skill I've often described as my ability to herd cats. And I'm not going to say there was a lot of that as part of this project, but I would say, Heather, you would need to develop that skill. And I don't want to overdo how difficult and challenging it was, but over the life of the project, I accepted a fantastic secondment opportunity to go work in the PHA, and Colin left the country. So I would like to thank everyone who contributed to this framework, and in particular the lead nurses within the Trust who brought issues and solutions to the table and who helped us work through both the language and the definitions within the framework that you have in front of you today. I'd also like to thank Angela Reid for her facilitation to manage this programme of work. It was not an easy task, and the many revisions and rewordings and meetings that had to take place were handled with both professionalism and integrity. So remember, this is a framework to support your decision making. It's to support your professional autonomy, and it's to support your professional accountability. Use it well. Thank you.
Thank you, Cathy. And thank you, Angela, for the invitation to participate in the launch of the support framework for delegation deciding to delegate, the document you all have on your table. I think it's a really useful and timely product and will be of great benefit to nursing and midwifery colleagues. And I know, Angela, what it's like to try to get a product to successful conclusion. There's a lot of hard work by everybody, so very well done in getting this document here today and having this launch. So you've heard, of course, that Colm Conway, the previous Chief Executive of the Social Care Council, co-chaired the reference group along with Cathy. He has left the country, but not because of this project, I have to say. He's gone on to bigger and better things. The involvement of social care in this important piece of work demonstrated a clear recognition by Angela McLarnon and her colleagues from NIPEC about the increasing complexity of service delivery and therefore the increasing need for care to be provided across professional boundaries. In order to deliver and sustain care going forward, it is vital that we provide the supports for professionals to work together safely. I know I can speak on behalf of Colm to say that we were delighted to be part of this work and feel that it was taken forward in the true spirit of partnership. Now, in parallel to this framework, the Office of Social Services has taken forward similar work and has recently issued a circular which provides guidance on the delegation of complex tasks to social care workers, and some of you may have already seen that. And both sets of guidance are complementary. In moving forward, I've been asked to replace Colm and chair a working group with Heather, as Heather has mentioned, which consists of the Directors of Social Work, Directors of Nursing and Directors of Adult Services, to co-produce a governance framework for multi-professional delegation. Now, we're aware of the complexity of delegation and the important decision that you as practitioners face in making a decision to delegate. Therefore, we believe that a multi-professional governance framework will further support both the nursing and social care delegation frameworks. Now, this work is just starting, and no doubt you'll be engaged in further conversations as the work progresses. So I would like to congratulate NIPEC, both Angelas, and those who supported the work. There were a lot of other people involved in bringing this product to successful conclusion. So all of you in producing Deciding to Delegate, and I trust that you will find it a very useful document. Thank you.
And I'm really delighted to launch the document, which I know you all have. I think it looks very well, actually, so congratulations to everyone on the production of a lovely document, which I think is one of its kind, I have to say. And I think it's possible and probably likely that once it's been launched, there will be conversations with colleagues in other countries, both inside the UK and further afield. And I know Angela has already started a conversation with colleagues in Scotland. But I think it provides important information and provides really good support for our registrants, for our nurses who are registrants with the NMC. And it is just one of the reasons, and there are several, but it's just one of the reasons why I felt strongly that we didn't need to pursue a path with nursing associates, because I knew we had really good plans in place to support our nurses and our nursing assistants and senior nursing assistants to work within the context of this framework once we got it to this point. And I also think it sits really nicely within the context of the new workforce strategy, enabling everybody to do the right thing and to be in the right place and have the right skills to provide the best outcomes for our population. And in the package of the regional job description and the code of practice that we now have, I think it's just perfect timing to bring all that together. I'm really pleased that there will be another phase to the work, and that we will begin to look in more detail at multidisciplinary working and how we can work with each other and I think understand and recognise the unique contribution that all professions and their support teams make to care. And this framework potentially is the opportunity and the vehicle to enable those conversations, along with my colleague, the Chief Social Service Officer, his circular, which came out last week in relation to social care delegation. So I think we can bring those things together and provide good practice examples and to show how we can work collaboratively with each other. This is the start of the journey. I think there's much more that we can do, and I would encourage all of you to share this document with staff and talk with them through it and address any issues or concerns that they might have, and use it as a vehicle for a professional conversation. And of course, I would say that it sits within the context of the professionalism work, which I led on behalf of the 4 UK CNOs, and enables that conversation to go to yet another level. So I'm really delighted to launch today. I want to say a particular thanks to Kathy and Colin and Patricia and Heather, because I know you will take this work on with gusto, and we will go from strength to strength. I'm also, look, the group have done amazing work, and I know how difficult it has been, and I've been involved in those conversations. And so it is really, really pleasing that we're at this place today. I want to pay particular thanks to the directors of nursing, and the reason I say that is because it would have been easy just to not do it or not support it, but I think everybody recognises that in the context of complex care in a variety of settings and a changing and transforming health and social care system, we need this in order to provide good professional practice. And a special thanks, obviously, to NIPEC and to Angela for the work and the support of Angela McLernan along the way in making those connections and taking time to reassure people and think and come up with innovative and creative solutions to what is, let's face it, delegation is a long-standing problem that we've all struggled with. So I'm glad to formally launch the document. I expect there should be like fireworks or music or cake or something, but it's January, so we'll have the document. Thank you very much.
I'm going to start by making an assumption this afternoon, and that assumption is that you are absolutely dying to take this document home with you. Set your tea to one side and read it cover to cover before you do anything else this evening. So rather than myself repeating everything that's in it, I obviously will allow you to do just that, and hopefully none of you will fall asleep over reading it. But I don't want to get into the detail right now. I want to simply outline a number of things that I hope will be of interest to you this afternoon. So I want to talk a little bit about the framework itself and the construct and why we've made it to be the way that it is, where it has come from. I want to talk to you a little bit about the people, the audience that we intend the document to address, who it's for. I want to talk a little bit about how we went about getting it to where it is today, because I think that's important to walk you through the journey and perhaps a little bit of the pain of getting to where we are today to launch. And then finally, a preamble into our exercise this afternoon, which will be around what we think will be needed for implementation, because this is a subject matter that the Executive Directors of Nursing and Charlotte and Angela and indeed some of the subgroups of CINEMAC have been talking about for the last 6 months or so, in terms of how we get the message out to registrants in Northern Ireland and others that need to listen and to know what's in it. So I'm going to start with the purpose of delegation, and I think Mary's always a hard act to follow, I have to say, and the presentation that you've provided for us, Mary, has very carefully and eloquently set the scene for what I have to say. So we understand that delegation in terms of this framework is, we're talking about nurses and midwives, the delegation that happens between nurses and midwives and to other people within the nursing and midwifery team. And obviously that is to make sure that the right people are doing the right thing in the right place at the right time and are appropriately prepared and supervised, as we've heard Mary talk about. Our starting position within this, and if we just go back, sorry Ursula, our starting position within this project was that the person in our care was the most important part of the conversation. At the launch of the Nursing Now programme of work in Northern Ireland a couple of weeks ago, I listened and was reminded to one of my colleagues from the Public Health Agency talking about an individual, an elderly man who enjoyed a host of things but had a number of conditions. And I was thinking that was very much like my own dad. My own dad lives with celiac disease, he's type 2 diabetic, he has COPD and he's congestive cardiac failure. And if you were admitting him to a hospital bed, you would probably think that he's a fairly ill gentleman at the age of 86, but he's not. He enjoys social activities, he's very involved in his church, he goes to the gym twice a week. There are a host of other things that are important about him, and I was reminded that that's exactly why we have completed the delegation framework. It's about the person, seeing the person that we're caring for and making sure that the appropriate skills are wrapped around that individual to provide person-centred care, and that's what this is really predicated on. So, next slide. A little bit about how we did this. So obviously we would start with the evidence. We knew back in 2015, and I wasn't a part of the project at that stage, but there was some work carried out by both the Clinical Education Centre and ourselves at NIPEC, because we were understanding that delegation was happening. The understanding across the professions was maybe not what it should have been, and indeed we wanted to get a firmer grip on how we would make sure that there was a process in place that people could work forward from. There was also a degree of anxiety that was palpable from across the professions that we would get this right, so there was an intention to do the right thing for people in our care. At that stage, the complexity of care was starting to escalate, and we know that over the last delegation framework was issued in 2009, so that's 10 years ago now, and so in that interim time we are doing lots more for people and caring for them in different places than we would have been doing 10 years ago. So something needed to be done. So we worked forward from a starting position of the evidence. We had a look at what other people were saying, what other jurisdictions were doing, what other countries were doing in this space, in order to inform what we were doing. And again, another colleague of mine on a different matter recently was talking about harvesting, what other people have done, which I really like that term. I believe Hugh McCahey is where it originated from in the South Eastern Trust. It's about not reinventing the wheel, and we have tried not to do that with this framework. We have tried very much to build on the expertise and the experience of others who have been perhaps thinking about this for longer than we have. So to draw your attention to a few of the key areas in terms of the development of the framework, we started with a workshop and had as many people in the room that we thought would contribute to that conversation in 2016. At that stage, I had a conversation with both Cathy and Colm and had presented the outline bones of what I thought might work, looking at the evidence and working forward. And from there, we put our best heads together in the room and put a framework outline and took it forward from there. And then iterations from that, we completed the information underneath the initial bones from the workshop that we had outlined through various meetings with a subgroup who then put the whole framework together. And as Cathy has mentioned, there were many days of working through the phrasing and whether or not people would understand what we meant by different words and what different words meant. So we really poured over the content of what you have today in order to get it to where it was. Now, we didn't leave it there. We felt that it was very important that the service side, our frontline colleagues, would test it. And we did that through 2 rounds of testing. So we had an initial testing at one stage in 2017, and then we took the first test and the outline that we had at that stage to the executive nurses and the CNO meeting. And they were very happy that we moved forward with the second round of testing, and that second round of testing then allowed us to finally refine to get to where we are today. And that then went to CINEMAC in March of 2018. And as I said, we've spent some months thinking about how we would then implement this from today. So who is it for? Well, primarily nurses and midwives, but as Mary has said, one of the key things that we understand from our learning in the past is that those who are being delegated to need to equally understand what is going on within the process of delegation. So it is our hope that it will not just be nurses and midwives, that it will be nursing assistants and senior nursing assistants and others who will look at the framework and who will seek to understand what it really means to be a delegator and a delegatee, and what the whole process of delegation is really about. And that is ensuring that person-centred outcomes are achieved and that the right skill mix is there at the right time, and we make best use of our team as a whole. So that's really the fundamental audience that we're talking about. But we also know that there will be implications for employers in terms of providing the right context for delegation. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute or two and what that means for delegation. But there is definitely something around having the right context of care to support good delegation processes. So employers will be interested in the framework. But also, and here's a question for now, which perhaps you might want to discuss around the tables later in the afternoon. We're thinking also the public may have an interest. So we're thinking that the public are at the centre of what we're trying to do. So the public will have an interest in how that is being done to them and the conversations that we will enter into to assure that they understand that it may be a nursing assistant or a senior nursing assistant that is interacting with them, but that there is a nurse or a midwife, and it will be a midwifery support worker obviously in that case, a nurse or a midwife that is in the background who is constantly checking, who is making sure that the assessments of care are there in place and appropriate, and that there is a feedback mechanism in place to make sure that any concerns are escalated appropriately as well. So in our view, we feel that the public could be interested in this framework as well, and just around the wraparound with them. So on to the next one. So this is the construct of the framework. You'll see it in the document. As I've said, I'm not going to unpack every letter in, or else you'd be here all afternoon. We would have, really have liked this to have been 3D in terms of the construct, but it's difficult to put writing around 3D models. What we're really saying with this is that we start with the context of care, we try to get it right, we then move to considering accountability and responsibility, and that is for everyone within the framework. It goes across delegator, delegatee, and also the employing organisation. There are accountabilities and responsibilities for everyone in this context. And then finally, there is a process, and the 5 R's, the right task, the right circumstance, the right direction, the right person, the right support and evaluation. All of those elements have to be considered in the round in determining whether or not you're going to delegate a task or duty as a nurse or a midwife. So to move on to the importance of context, we know from the evidence that the context of care is extremely important to support good decision making for delegation. We know from a range of evidence that is in literature and then also anecdotal evidence that people can sometimes make poor decisions because they're perhaps understaffed, or they don't understand how delegation works, or there aren't the appropriate policies and procedures in place, or indeed that a simple thing like a job description doesn't have the appropriate wording in it to allow someone to undertake a new role or increase their scope of role. So we're saying that the context of care is very important, and it's important for all of those reasons to support individuals to make good decisions. We have 3 domains within the context of care, and one of them is around understanding the regulatory context. And that is from a perspective of both the, obviously the delegator and delegatees, but also from the employer. So if you move the slide on, Ursula, thank you. And it's important also for the employer to understand that for a nurse or a midwife, they not only are delegating within a process that they understand themselves and their own policies and procedures and terms and conditions of their jobs, but also as a registrant who is answerable and accountable to the Nursing and Midwifery Council. You are on a register, and a part of your decision making will be to consider it within that context. And the employers are fully aware, for those of us who are on registers, that that is a part and parcel. That goes right to the Executive Director of Nursing and the decisions that he or she would make. They are always thinking about their registration and their accountability, not just in terms of their employment, but also in terms of their professional registration. So that is an important part of our context and decision making. So moving on. The final bit of the framework is the actual decision, and in the decision making we're asking people to consider the accountability, the responsibility, and then also the process, and going back to the 5 elements. And I'm not going to dwell on that because we've talked about it for quite a bit there earlier on. So moving on, what we do understand and know, and we've taken a lot of feedback over the period of testing, is that for many decisions, the decisions are fairly straightforward. The obvious answer will be there. Often it's because someone is in plain sight or they're very experienced, and on many occasions that decision will be fairly straightforward to any registrant making the decision around a particular aspect of care. There are other times, and as I stood in the room and listened to our many registrants talking about some of the complex issues that are out in care environments currently, I really began to understand that it might be easier to work for NASA and be an actual rocket scientist than take on some of these complex decisions. So we don't underestimate some of the challenges that are out there in service environments. But what we do say is that we're trying now to provide a support mechanism and a support framework that will enable you as a nurse or a midwife to make that decision and to think through what you are deciding. And this gives you a framework. This decision support tool now gives everyone a framework, and that through our testing we really came to understand. The good feedback that we were getting from registrants was that people really were thinking about how they were making a decision, and they were being driven to think through the decision support tool. And this then gave a rationale as to why a decision was being made, or why to delegate or to not delegate. And on both occasions, the nurses and midwives were able to actually demonstrate in response to the decision support tool why they had come to the decision they had. So just very quickly to run through, the decision support matrix tries to look at the thinking that is required to undertake a decision around delegation underneath, using the aspects of accountability, responsibility, and then the process, the 5 R's as we have called it. So we have lifted all of the elements that we feel are relevant in those particular aspects and transposed them into the questions that are in the decision support tool. So that means that if someone works through the decision support tool, they should consider all of the elements within the framework as they answer the questions that are there. We have some assumptions. The accountability and responsibility and the escalation processes we felt we really had to pull out, even though they are repetitious throughout the decision support tool in essence itself. But we felt that they were such an important element that we needed to have them smattered several times, just to remind people to go back and check before they make a decision to delegate. And of course, all of this is predicated on a person-centred plan of care. We, as nurses and midwives, must have a plan of care in place, and that based on a comprehensive person-centred needs assessment before we start to delegate any tasks or duties to someone else. And I suppose as we move forward to look at the decision support tool, so the next slide, Ursula, thank you. You won't be able to see this at the back, and my apologies for that. And the writing is very small. You'll not even be able to see it at the front, but you do have it in front of you in terms of the document, so we're all good for that. In terms of the actual layout of the decision support tool, you will see that we have a traffic light system, the green, amber and red. And in thinking through the three domains, and we have based this on a risk assessment, so it's the potential for harm, the complexity of care, and then finally the predictability of the outcome. So across those three domains, the questions are posed, and the questions come from the right task, right circumstance, right person paradigms. So all of those elements are in there. But as we pose the questions, the registrant is asked to think about whether or not it is a simple decision, a yes or a no, and that's an assurance in the green area, whether there's a maybe, which is in the orange area, or whether there is a definite no, which is in the red area. Now, why did we do it this way? Well, as we began to have conversations, we realised that delegation on any one given day can change. Delegation is a dynamic concept. What is right for me today could change tomorrow because my condition changes. What is right for any of us this week may be different next week because something changes about us, or something indeed could change about the person that we're delegating to. So there's never a one size fits all. We must always be reviewing our decisions to delegate, and we must always be considering whether or not it's the right thing to do based on who we're delegating to and also the condition of the individual. And for me, the one clear element in that is that the need to consistently update and continually assess the person in our care and their needs as well. So the assessment that we have today may not be the assessment that we have tomorrow. And thankfully, our PACE approach to planning nursing care, which we are now in the process of rolling out across the trusts, does just that. It enables nurses, in particularly, and hopefully we'll get to midwifery at a point in time, it enables our nurses to think dynamically, to continually assess and to write that down and make sure that those things are captured on a regular basis. So the decision support matrix enables that decision making. In terms of the orange area, what we're asking people to do is where there is an ambiguity, is there a mitigating action that you can put in place that might allow you to delegate, and if there isn't, then maybe you shouldn't delegate. And if there is any doubt at all, then don't do it. So that is what we have said in the framework, and hopefully people will be able to follow it and find it fairly straightforward. So through to the next slide. One of the things that people asked us through the time that we spent out in the trusts testing the framework was that we would have some examples. So we have actually worked up some live examples that we gained through the testing phases to put them in the back of the document. And we are hoping before hopefully the end of March to do something fairly exciting with these in terms of resources for the framework. So moving on, where have we got to now? Well, next slide please, Ursula. Where we are now is through the discussions that we had to get this framework into the place that it is today. And I have to say, because we had Colin and Kathy in the room, and then subsequently Heather and Patricia, it gave us a very good opportunity to consider the wider aspects, because we know that for nurses and midwives making decisions within nursing and midwifery teams, and I think Mary has demonstrated there's no complacency around this. We can't always assume that we're getting it right even within our own teams. But the sharp end of the wedge is probably in the intersections of care with our social work and social care colleagues and beyond. And as we began to have conversations with our colleagues out in service side, we realised that often that was what was keeping them awake at night, was concerns in this area. So rather than think that we could solve it all at once, we decided to phase the project. And so what we have today is the launch of phase 1, which is with the nursing decision tool for nursing and midwifery. And that relates to nursing teams. It is also the decision framework that you would make about delegating to someone else, because it's a process. But we recognise that overarching the framework and the OSS release, the circular, on the 19th of January, there are a set of governance principles about how teams work together. And I suppose through this journey we've realised that our codes are slightly differently worded, and nurses and midwives absolutely retain accountability for the outcomes of care, which may be slightly different to other professions. So it's how we work together that if there is, and again going back to the best interests of the person so that their front door doesn't become literally swinging off its hinges with the number of people coming through. So if we're thinking about that and those situations, that we have the right people taking on the right tasks, but that there is a line of accountability back to the nurse or the midwife in those situations, and that is very clear, very visible, and that if any escalations are needed, that everyone in that collaboration knows who it goes to and who will be accountable for what. So in terms of where we are with that, you'll see there are 3 extra areas that we're dealing with on the slide. Those 3 extra areas are part of the project that Patricia has talked about, and Heather is also now co-chairing that with Patricia. And we're working with the executive directors of nursing, the executive directors of social work, and the directors of adult care. And that, I have to say, has been a joy to be part of, to see 2 professions really working hard together in order to make sure that they work in a very integrated way, in a co-produced way, and in a way that supports people who are out there in our services right now. So this afternoon, this is me done, you'll be glad to know. So this afternoon we have a little bit of work for you to do. We want you to think for about 20 minutes about the framework itself and how you could support people within your teams and colleagues within your organisation to implement this framework. We have table mats on your tables, and in time-honoured tradition, as we like to do in NIPEC, we will lift these afterwards if you could scribble a few notes on them in answer to the 3 questions that are on your table. If you would just move on, Ursula. We have had some thoughts ourselves about how we get the message out there. The first thing that I would like to say is that you've all got a big pile of documents on your table. We don't want any left. I will be very upset if I have to take any with me back to NIPEC today, so please don't upset me. We've worked really hard to get to where we are today, and I'd like you to take as many of them back as you'd like. We will make sure that there are more documents going out to the trusts, and if you would like more, please let us know, and we'll do our best to get them out there by one way or another, and that might be for those of you who are in NIPEC regularly that you pick them up and take them with you. But make sure there are none left on your table. Do take them with you. So the document is the first resource that we have. If I'm honest, we would really have liked to have digitalised the decision support tool into an app. To be perfectly honest, I could paper the walls with the number of bids that I have written around finding funding. We're not dead in the water yet, but we haven't got money for it just yet. And obviously there are implications about putting together an app in terms of maintaining it and upkeeping it. But hopefully we'll get over the line with that. I'll not make any promises just yet, but that's our intention. We will have a Twitter chat in March, so I'm expecting everybody in the room. If you haven't signed up for Twitter yet, please do, because if you all take to Twitter that night, we'll be absolutely flat out to have a conversation about how delegation works in practice. We'll release the date on the NIPEC website and on our social media channels near the time, so watch out for that. We also have thought about a microsite. You'll know from our website, any of you that visit regularly, we have a number of microsites that support resources, and we intend to develop a microsite for delegation and put chunks off. So we're digitalising it a little, but it's not just the same as an app, but it will be online for you to view. Then the scenarios that I talked about, we are hoping, if any of you have looked at the work that Charlotte and I did on professionalism, we've got 3 animations on enabling professionalism on the NMC site. We hope to do the same thing with the scenarios and have 3 animations around the scenarios in the back of the document, which means that they're easier viewing for people just in terms of how the decision making works, and we hope to have that done by the end of March of this year. Then finally, you'll have on your tables this little resource here, which is a fold out, and it's a prototype for those of you from an IPC background, please do not fall off your chair. We have found a way of IPCing these. We understand that we'll be able to get waterproof paper. Again, this is hard copy. It's not ideal. It's not what we would want, but it's what we've got to live with for now. And we've also had some feedback that people would find this very useful, a pocket-sized, wipe clean resource, which has the key elements of the framework in it. And so we'd like your thoughts on that. We've got the mock-ups on your tables and just how useful that would be. So 3 questions we have for you. The first is, who do you think in your teams, bearing in mind that everything that everyone has said this afternoon, who do you think in your teams need to hear about the delegation framework? The second one then is, how or where would you, maybe how and where would you want this to happen? And bear in mind that myself and Ursula are happy to come out to the Trust. We are happy to do a number of awareness sessions, and we can arrange that over the next number of months, all being well. And then what resources would you find most useful, and include any bright ideas that we haven't thought about. If there's anything else that we have missed that you use in the Trust that would be of value, then write it down. And we have table mats for you all to record. So in terms of how you would do this, if you would appoint somebody to write, and then we'll take some feedback just before we finish this afternoon in terms of the bright ideas and solutions, and who you think this should go out to, who you think we should be addressing, who you think we should be inviting into the room to talk about this. So it's 3:10. We're actually ahead of time. Yay! So we'll give you about 25 minutes, and then we'll do a bit of feedback just around, that's about 25 to 4, and then hopefully we'll finish slightly ahead of schedule, if that's okay. Everybody clear? Is there anybody with any questions? No? Great. Thank you.